Hello guys, I'm Diego and I make videos on personal growth for gay bi and queer men. And today I want to share a little bit about my healing journey and the fact that I'm now embracing all of the parts of me and the parts that I thought I shouldn't have anymore. Things like my love of music and clubbing, certain desires and like thoughts, and my own sexuality and my own sensuality even, that I kind of left behind in the last few years to focus on myself and in my inner work, my inner discovery of who I really am. But now all of these desires and wants and wishes are coming back up and really strong in my life. And they are so strong that it's impossible to not look and not recognize that these desires still exist inside of me. So now I'm wondering, what if the actual desires and pleasures and thoughts are not the problem, but how we express them? And perhaps it is a process of finding healthier ways to express them with more intention and with more self-care. For example, I always loved music and I used to go clubbing quite often up until a few years ago. And I was living in London and I would go out in London and I would go out in Europe and in other parts of Europe for like gay parties. And yes, there are a lot of excesses, a lot of alcohol, drugs, and excessive behavior in general, not for everyone, not all the time, but yes, there could be. And that was one of the reasons that I stepped back, because I needed the energy to focus on myself. But I was in the gym the other day, I was listening to some club music, and I was like, I miss that so much, and I miss being around people, and I miss going out, and I miss dancing, and like expressing my body's movements, and like being with other people and this sensuality that involves, and like meeting other guys. And I'm now back in my hometown for a while. I don't know how long I'm gonna stay here, so of course some of those things are not available for me right now, but it's just the recognition that I still like those things and I miss that in my life. And of course I don't miss the hangover, I don't miss like the recovery periods that sometimes that involved. And I'm wondering, how can I express that in my life in the future, in better ways, in healthier ways, of course. But anyway, my point is I had to step back from certain places and people and behaviors in the past to focus on myself, and I needed the energy to focus on myself. And in my healing work, in my therapeutic work of trauma healing, and I realized that I was very disconnected from myself a few years ago, and there are a lot of excesses in our community. It can be very hardcore sometimes. um, so I'm very glad that I did the things that I did, and I think just in general I wasn't in a very good place to be grounded around certain people or certain places, um, in the way that I'm probably more centered and self-centered now than 1-2 years ago. But the problem is, what I didn't realize is that I was rejecting parts of me in the process. I started like judging my own behavior. I became very self-judgmental of certain places that I went or certain things that I did in the past, and even my own desires, my love for music, my love for dancing and clubbing, and in my own like body, like being with another guy, being intimate with someone else. And I was rejecting all of that because I thought that now that I'm a healed person, or I'm getting somewhere in my healing journey, that certain behaviors or certain thoughts and desires were not welcome anymore. But now I'm starting to realize that it wasn't my desires that was the problem. It was probably how I was expressing them, and the location, the setting, the lack of boundaries that I didn't have in interacting with people, my lack of ability saying no and being firm with my decisions, and the unconscious motivations perhaps, and like looking for external validation from other guys, from other people in general, because I wasn't validating myself or who I was. And my therapist very lovingly always say to me that there's no right or wrong in life. There's just experiences and consequences of the experiences and our actions, like consequences of our actions. So there's probably actions and that I did in the past, and I suffer the consequences of those actions, that now I probably wouldn't go the route again. I would probably choose a different path. But I now also see that rejecting certain parts of myself that I find ugly or that I shouldn't have by now, that I shouldn't have this desire or this thought, it's also not the answer, because in the end, we are all of it. We are our light and our shadow, and we are the parts of us that we like, that we enjoy, that we love. But we are also the parts that we don't love as much. The parts that we wish we didn't have, but we do have. We wish we wish it was different, but sometimes we have to learn how to live with that instead of repressing it. And I also think that there's a risk of repressing our desires, and perhaps it can come up, in unhealthy ways in the future because we're repressing it so much. So I'm learning to accept my shadows and perhaps desires that I thought I shouldn't have anymore, but I still do, and now I feel them very strongly. And I think the way to go now is, how can I find ways that are healthier, that it's not destructive for my body and in my routine, in my lifestyle, but how can I welcome back these parts of myself that I forgot somewhere in the past. And I've been through a very isolating period in the last few years, but also most strongly the last year or so. And I'm feeling the need to reconnect with people, to get out of my shell. I'm not living on my own anymore. I'm back to my mom's house for a while, but I'm feeling the urge to make a plan, to move on to the next chapter. And I'm probably gonna have to reimagine how I interact with people, how I express my desires, my love of music, my love for clubbing, that I know that at some point in my life I will have to experience it again and see how I feel in a different way. And how do I make new connections in this new version of me? And they say that true healing is in relating with people, right? And is how we practice, how we practice our boundaries, how we practice saying no, how we test our limits, for what things do I say yes and what things do I say no. And perhaps I'm gonna have to practice some of those teachings that I have now in my life. Anyway, I don't have all the answers, and I just wanted to share where I am with this right now in my life. But I think that maybe it's not about fixing everything. It's not about rejecting the parts that we judge about ourselves, the parts that we feel they're ugly or they shouldn't be expressed or we shouldn't feel them anymore. But perhaps how do we embrace those parts with love? How do we offer compassion to ourselves and self-love? How do we integrate ourselves with love that we deserve? And I think I'm still learning how to do that, and maybe you are too. So thanks for being on this journey with me as I learn to do that. And let me know in the comments if that resonated, how you are getting on in your own journey. And thanks for being here, and see you again soon. Bye. Have a good day.